clinical studies and clinical testing follow a traditional set of development processes. This is based on scientific mandate and the scientific principles of doing no harm first and optimizing the effectiveness. So it isn't magic that we see a chemical in the laboratory and then sprinkle it on to our patients. That's very, very rare when you hear about these extremely rare compassionate situations. The translation from basic to clinics is through these phase processes. Phase 1 studies are typically first in man studies or first in a group of patients, and typically first drug tested in a small group of healthy volunteers, 15, 20, 30 patients, healthy volunteers who go under rigorous testing. They get the medication depending on the design of the phase 1 every day. Sometimes they need to stay in the clinical trial unit to be tested multiple times. They have blood drawn at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes to understand the profile of those medications. So we test the safety and tolerability of those medications in healthy volunteers. Sometimes phase 1 can happen in disease patients like pulmonary hypertension, but those phase 1 studies are not to develop a sense of effectiveness of the drug. It's more about the safety and tolerability. As a mandate, we don't want a highly toxic drug going into patients, not only healthy volunteers, but also disease patients. Phase 2 studies are typically the new drug that's given to a group of patients and is typically into patients of the disease that is being studied. These studies test further safety because you could imagine if you have pulmonary hypertension with some liver dysfunction, that drug may act differently in you than it does in a healthy subject who has a normal kidney or liver function. And so you look at a further safety and tolerability profile. And sometimes people call phase 2 studies proof of concept studies. We're trying to see, is there a signal of efficacy? And in rare diseases, this is an important step for stakeholders who invest time and effort, and even investigators who conduct clinical trials with the support of the NIH, for example. So this is proof of concept. When we get to phase 3 studies, these studies are formal studies typically, and they're often viewed as approval studies. And they seek to interact with the regulators to demonstrate to them that this drug is actually effective. And it typically compares the standard of care on top of their drug versus just the standard of care alone. Fairly traditional design, but there are other designs as well. These studies are larger. In pulmonary hypertension, depending on the goal that you're trying to achieve, the primary endpoint of these clinical trials, the number of patients that we need to study historically is between 250 to about even 12 or 1,300 patients, which is very difficult in a rare disease. To just draw a contrast for you, blood pressure medications, systemic hypertension, regular blood pressure, high blood pressure, or coronary artery disease. These trials are thousands of patients. It's not a rare disease, so that they are required to test in thousands and thousands of patients. And because they can test in thousands of patients, the number of the incremental improvement that they make on standard of care could be smaller and smaller. The problem we have in pulmonary hypertension is because of the rarity of your disease, we have to be thinking outside the box on how to do better phase 3 studies so that we can show the incremental improvement that some of these medications have.